Anyways, we could get started. So today's topic is on SiteCron. So I'm not sure how many people have actually used this. My name is Akshay Sura, by the way. I originally started SiteCron just because the companies I was working at, we had a need to launch news which was specific to the stock market. So anything over there falls under FCC rules. So if you are publicly traded on the stock market, you need to give a specific piece of information to your investors on the stock market at that same time. If you don't, you get penalized by the Federal Trade Commission. So because of that, the company I was working for at the time wanted me to find something which delivers news articles at a specific time, and that was the original requirement. And when we looked into Sitecore Scheduling, which I'm sure some of you have looked at it, whether it's for commerce, whether it's for regular scheduling, it's interval based. You cannot guarantee a specific time. So if I say that I need a piece of news to go out, or an article to be published at 9:30 in the morning or 11:53 in the afternoon, it's not possible for us to guarantee that. Because of that, I built SiteCron. So SiteCron has several kinds of jobs you can run. As you can see, the basic SiteCron job, which you can build based on an implementation of iJobs. So SiteCron runs on Quartz.net, which is a open sourced scheduling library for .NET, so you could use it in any of your .NET applications. So I use that because it seemed the most logical and free one to use. So by default, it lets you inherit the iJob implementation, and you could write whatever you want in the job and schedule it accordingly and trigger it accordingly. The second one, which is my favorite, is the PowerShell. There you go, PowerShell. The reason for that is 99% of my jobs are all PowerShell based. You could do a ton of things. So it's not just what SPE can do with Sitecore, but what SPE can rely on base PowerShell commands itself to call REST-based APIs, call different APIs, do different things. So my jobs typically right now rely on pulling syndication feeds and pushing syndication feeds across to different sites, pulling them from different sites. And the reason for the criticality, the current company I work with, they have about 300 odd jobs which run every single day. And all of them are money making to them. So if one job doesn't run, they get a call from the customer, they lose money from the customer, or potentially lose the customer. So I use the PowerShell job myself because I could do pretty much anything. I don't have to roll out code. I don't have to do a new build. I don't have to push it through the CI/CD pipeline. I could just install it as an item if I need to. The two at the bottom you see, and I'm going to bore you with a bunch of crap because I hate slides. I want to get them done before I get to the real job. The two at the bottom came out of the need where people were saying that, hey, I already have a Sitecore job, or I already have a Sitecore schedule command, but I need it to run at a specific time. Can SiteCron help? And again, this came from real need, from real companies. So I built those two so that you can run a SiteCron job as a Sitecore job. So a lot of the infrastructure teams were requiring or looking at the jobs viewer to see what was running at which time. So that's one of the reasons for that. Out of the box, SiteCron comes with, again, two separate kind of jobs. So these are the two which come when you first install. So you could do a smart publish, you could specify which database to publish to, and things like that. And the second one is execution of PowerShell, which lets you do anything you want. Typically, that should take care of most of your needs, because if you can run a PowerShell script, pretty much you could do anything. So I didn't feel a need to do more kinds of jobs. SiteCron jobs are based on what is called as a cron expression. I don't know how many of you guys have looked at cron expressions, but cron expressions, you can specify like I need this job to run every day at 4 a.m. or I need it to run every Wednesday at 5 p.m. So things like that. So SiteCron by itself can run schedules based on repetition, reoccurrence, or you could say I need it to run at this specific time or at this specific date. So you could say I need it to run December 31st at 11:59 p.m. 59 seconds. So it will execute at that specific time as well. So that gives you kind of like a good gauge of what you're looking for. Promise, this is the last slide after this. I can breathe again. So there's a lot of stuff which we could go through, but essentially as we go through it, you can see what it can do and the different things, but you really don't need to care for all of that at this moment. Okay, now that the crazy part is done. So SiteCron's on NuGet. I really don't update the module on Sitecore modules because it takes forever. And there's probably one person doing it, they're very slammed. So trying to get an update run through Sitecore modules takes forever. So I don't really remember the last time I updated it, but the NuGet package stays current. The current version is 3.0.4. There's a bunch of things which I'm currently working on, which are going to get published soon, so that's one thing to remember. What I have here is a plain vanilla Sitecore instance, so I am not showing you smoke and mirrors, so all that loads. And then, so as you can see, all I have is PowerShell, and again, installing PowerShell is not a requirement. You could run non-PowerShell jobs, it's just that I like PowerShell, so I install PowerShell on every instance. And then here, we basically have a very simple non-Helix project, because I'm not trying to do a project. But essentially it doesn't really have much. I have a published profile which is folder based, which pushes it to the website root. I do not have anything installed in here. The only reason I have XDB is I don't want my license to bark at me, and I don't want to deal with XDB, so I just disabled the XDB is the only reason that's there. So other than that, there's really nothing in here that I need or can do. So to install SiteCron, it's very, very simple. Just go in here. Come on, internet. Okay. So that's installed, and now you can see that what it does is it installs the common login and commonlogging.core, which Quartz uses, and Quartz is what we use for SiteCron. The latest version, so we are using Quartz 2.5. I think you can go up to 2.6.2, but Quartz has greatly upgraded to version 3, which does asynchronous execution of schedule tasks, which is really, really cool. So I want to get into that. It gives us some more ability to do kind of a bunch of cool things in terms of reporting and execution reports and things like that. But I already started building it into the product, so it's easier. And by the way, this is free, so I keep calling it product, so don't think that it is. What it does by default, other than adding the references it needs, is that it gives you this folder. Since we're doing it pure NuGet basis, and again, I'm going to have trouble with this once I switch to the new version of NuGet, but it puts 2 packages in here. So the full install, which will have items as well as files, and then just the item only version. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to cheat a little bit. Alright, so I installed it via NuGet. on my project. Now I'm just gonna go in here and install just the items only package at this moment. So even though I'm just installing items in here, it doesn't really know anything about SiteCron or anything like that at this moment in time, just because we have not pushed any code to it yet. So it does show you the tree, but it doesn't really have everything we need. So let me actually get back into it using admin so I can push it. Something about when you're demoing, everything which is supposed to go wrong will go wrong. So, alright, while I wait for that. So essentially out of the box, what it shows you is it shows you the SiteCron node over there. There's a folder called as out of the box. We'll get into execution reports in a second. We'll get into auto for a second. As you can see, it has a few of the jobs which are shown by default. So PowerShells, and again, all it's doing is it's executing a specific type, and you could customize the type and to do whatever you want. The second portion is the cron expression, so you can go to cron viewer and say, okay, I need it to execute Monday and Sunday at 5, and then it'll generate a cron expression for you, so you can schedule whichever way you want. You can also specify that it needs to execute at a specific time. This is very crucial if you have something which needs to go out at a specific time. You can pass in parameters just like the URL parameters, totally up to you. You can specify any items you want to push into this to make it available for the job. So even if you write a custom job and you want to pass in some items to it, you can over here. The only exception to that is in this case, because it's a PowerShell job, I restrict it to only one. You can specify 1,000 in here. It'll only pick the first one just because of recursion and not knowing the dependency of one script to another, so I restrict it to only one. There's a concept of archive after execution, so once it executes, to archive it using the Sitecore archive functionality. If you disable it, obviously it will look disabled. There's a stats section which kind of shows you the last runtime, next runtime, how long did it execute for. This is a little bit deprecated. I'll show you the new way of doing it, but I still left it there because there's some people who actually use it quite a bit. Let me get back here real quick. Oh no, doesn't want to listen to me, huh? So all I'm going to do here is I will publish this project, and all it's doing is just pushing the configs, which it adds. So in the config space, there's a concept of SiteCron jobs. Again, sorry, let me see if I can. So SiteCron jobs themselves exist as items, like you can see over here, or they can exist as configuration. So you can load jobs via config. The reason, so every feature which was added to SiteCron was a requirement by a client, unfortunately. One of their requirements was to be able to load configuration of scheduling based on environment. So in production, we want specific jobs to be loaded and run by default. In stage, I want a different set of jobs to be loaded. So you could load configurations via, you could load jobs via configuration, which is kind of interesting, and we do use it in one of the clients at this moment. The other configuration, which is sitecron.config, you have a few settings, and we can get into that at some point, but Basically what the context DB is, so the reason for this is on CM we wanted to run on based on master DB, but on CD we wanted to run on based on web or prod or whatever you call your production web instance. The reason being is one of the instances where we needed to generate a huge, I'm talking about a few hundred megs of gzipped sitemap XML. We needed it to be run on each of the CDs, and we needed it to be run in the context of web, so that's why that setting was added. There's a concept of how long the wait is before it executes. So if you want something to be executed at this second, an existing job, which we'll look at, that's the delay over there. There's a concept of environment. Again, this is purely for logging purposes at this moment. There's a few commands in here for executing the job at this moment. There's handlers for listening to saved and deleted for us to realize when if the configuration changed to reload it. There is the initialized pipeline right there. There's some dependencies in here where we are using base Microsoft DI, but it should work with anything, where we're trying to specify the job provider. So as you noticed, there's one which only looks at the database to load jobs. There's one which just looks at the config to load jobs. There's one which looks at both database and the configuration file to load the SiteCron job. So you could do whatever you need to. Usually in the CD instances you don't even want it running, but there might be cases where you do. There's a log appender which pushes it to a specific SiteCron.log, so it doesn't clutter your log file in there. So if we get back here, reload that. It takes forever, huh? Welcome to Sitecore. Anyway, so you could fiddle with these configurations depending on what you need. There is an active bug which we're trying to resolve. So the current environment we run in, we have a gazillion CDs and a gazillion CMs running, and the remote events do give a weird error in there. Don't ask me why. I haven't had the chance to debug them, but that's why I kind of have them disabled at this moment. So now that this guy is back, let's wait for the content editor. All right, so just to take a look at it, we have our out of the box. So if I go back in here and then enable it, I just have some little saving event which kind of shows you that it is oh, I'm still running on the old time, huh? Let me see. That should work. Alright, so basically all I did is I enabled it, I set it so that it runs at 9:59 a.m. My current time, I don't know if you notice, is 9:57 a.m. back in California. The other thing, I'll wait for that to run, but while it runs, we can take a look. So there's a concept of execute now. So you might have a job scheduled to run tomorrow, day after tomorrow, but you have a need that you need to run it right now. So there's a concept called execute now. So you basically right click. When you do, oh, there you go. It basically all it does, it makes a copy of the job, sets the time so that it executes in 10 seconds from the time you click the button, and then it basically executes that job. And once it's done, it removes it from the auto folder. And what it does do though is that every time it executes a job, it creates an execution report. So one of the needs from one of the clients I was working at is basically to know what the job was, when did it run, any log output. So you are able, whether you're running a Sitecore PowerShell job, whether you're running your own custom job, there is a concept of loading all the log entries or all the status into memory and pass it back to SiteCron or to PowerShell, and we log it in the execution report. So you could have this, like some of the jobs we run have pages and pages of log output, so we know what's happening inside of a job. This is pretty simple, but like as you can see, this one does something completely different. So essentially you could execute the job, and as you're executing the job, you could collect the status and then push it back so that it gets recorded in here. In these two cases, because they are execute now jobs, you don't see a job reference because the job was archived the moment it executes it, because it was on the fly job. But if I were to, I'm hoping that my guy executed. If I were to open this guy, executed the same exact PowerShell, but it executed on schedule. So as you can see, it does have a reference to the actual job because that job wasn't archived. When we look at, the log, and I want to actually first look at the one over here. The good thing about a SiteCron job is it executes on time every single. It's not even showing the highlighting, is it? Okay, I'm actually highlighting that, by the way. But anyways, so it executes the job exactly on time. If you notice, see, right there, exactly on time when we set it. You could set it to the seconds, you could set it to whatever you need to, but that's the best part about it, is it will always run on time. There's only one catch to it: your CM can't be asleep. So if you're leaving your CM instance running and after a while you have it set to die, the app pool dies, then obviously nothing's going to get run. But if your CM stays alive, it will execute every time, every single time, exactly at the same time. So here, every time it reloads the configuration, it kind of tells you what it's doing. So it kind of gives you an idea of what version you're running. It will tell you that the job is not loaded and why is the job not loaded, or if the job is loaded, what the job source is. And it's really important to know if it's coming from config, if it's coming from the database, what the name of the job is, what the type name is for the custom job type, and what the schedule is. Not that you would know anything by looking at the cron expression, but if you've done enough jobs, you would know exactly what the reasoning is. The other thing I did wanted to mention over here is that it does not always reload the job. So it detects, so after every job is done, again I'm highlighting it but it is not showing it to you. So after every job is done, it writes stats. So it writes to that item bucket to write execution reports. It updates itself to write the stat information. So when that happens, it detects that the job was modified, but it was modified to update the statistics and not anything else. So it doesn't reload SiteCron and all the jobs. But if you notice, whenever we update a job, it will reload the entire SiteCron. And as you can see here, when the job does run, the job's duty was to run the PowerShell script, and it does run the PowerShell script, and it puts it in the SP log, because all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to write a log entry into it. Other than that, it's pretty much simple enough that it will execute it. There's a few when you try to have a job, so for instance, this job is based on a template called as a SiteCron job, and essentially all it has is it has all the basic things you need in order for you to execute a SiteCron job. But tomorrow you might have a need where you might need additional fields to run your own custom job. When you write your own custom iJob implementation, maybe you need additional parameters. In this case, when I want to run a job like a SiteCron job as a Sitecore job, I need 2 additional parameters, but I need all the other things along with it. So all I do is I inherit the SiteCron job. So when you look at the standard values for this guy, you pretty much have everything you need to run a SiteCron job. On top of it, you get additional fields you add to it. Same with this one. If you want to run and execute existing Sitecore command, all this guy does is inherits the SiteCron job, so you get all the fields. But there's some additional fields which I added right here, which I need. So I get access to that, so I can specify which Sitecore job command I want to run as a SiteCron job. So if you need to extend it, you just create another template, add the fields you want, and inherit the SiteCron job, and it will get executed. I think that's pretty much it, really. Let's go back here for a second. So as you can see, we did talk about right there, the config-based jobs, which is kind of interesting depending on what you do, where you do it. Job reports we looked at, stats we looked at. So upcoming features for this one is mainly for me to get upgraded for the Quartz.net to 3.0, which is a huge coding change for myself as anyone who uses this module, because the implementation of iJob is a little bit different. They cleaned it up a lot. So by me doing it, it's going to force everyone to do it. There's quite a bit of people who use this, I think, or the last time I checked anyways. Let me see. Yeah, so there's quite a few downloads per day which run on this. And I don't want to bother them at this moment, but that's something I'm looking at. That'll give us asynchronous execution along with a bunch of other things, which let me track how the job is running, when is it running, when is it done. I'm in the middle of making a jobs viewer or tagging SiteCron jobs inside the jobs viewer by default, so we can see the statusing and stuff. So that's something which is being worked on. Archive after execution is actually very, very easy for one-time jobs or jobs which we don't need existing after a while. There's an execute now feature which you guys saw, executing them as Sitecore jobs, disabling them parameters again. So I think I kind of showed it too, but let me see over here. So the actual PowerShell job, we pass in the parameter 1 as 13, and if you notice, oh great, it says parameter 1 is null because there's a bug in there, but there is a pull request for that by someone. The multiple environments I get asked every single time. So again, the way it's been written is that if you have a job server or a primary CM, and if you set that setting, SiteCron will only run on the primary CM and not on all the CMs in the environment. If you don't have that setting set in your scalability settings, it will just, so it's looking for the publishing instance is essentially what it's doing. If you don't have that set, it will run on all the CMs or wherever it's installed. If you have that set, it'll only run on that server. We looked at parameters, that's actually getting pushed out pretty soon. Most of the stuff is on GitHub. It's open source, so you guys can pull it, do whatever you need to, do a pull request if you want to. NuGet's the best place to get it. This John wrote a great article about SiteCron recently on Sitecore 9 and SiteCron, which was kind of nice. I have a ton of videos and blog entries on mine. I myself use a cron maker just because I don't care to remember how to come up with a cron expression, and I'm not that smart. Again, we looked at installing Stack Exchange is a great resource by default anyways. All of you guys should be on it, should look at it every day if possibly can. It's in public beta, which means we still need everyone's help to be going there, contributing. So if you go there to upvote some questions, do so if you can. If you have time to spare, answer a few questions, comment on a few questions, just show some activity so that we can push it to actual public rather than still being in public beta. It would really help. Of course, my baby, Sitecore Slack. We are all on it, including Mike and Camrose and every single person who is on it all the time. I encourage you to get on it and bug Mark and Adam because it's fun. But every one of you should be on Sitecore Slack, whether you whether you like it or not. Just because there's a ton of activity going on, you find out what's happening. You can talk to a lot of people. There's about 3,900 people, I think, from around the world right now. There's 1,000 active users at any time, which is really, really good. And there's a ton of thing happening. So really encourage you guys to go up there and sign up. Again, my name is Akshay Sura. I'm on pretty much everything, but Slack and Twitter are the best places to get me if you guys need to get in touch with me. I will stop on time, I think. Anyone has any questions? So how did you phrase it, Jason? Who gets a poster?
The ones that ask the smart question.
There you go. I'm not going to use my version of it. So we have 7 to give away. So that's half of 3.5 posters I have to give away. So if anyone has any smart questions, you said?
Smart questions.
Smart questions. We're more than happy to give away the posters.
Can we have no smart question?
Sure.
How do you find those jobs? Are you looking for a specific place?
So everyone on the boat.
How do you find those jobs? Are you looking in a specific place in the content tree, or can it be somewhere else in the tree?
That's a good question. So I am looking for everything under this SiteCron folder. So you could add different folder structures in here. It uses content search to find them anyways, I think, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, it'll pick it up. Anything in there.
Good question.
How do you prevent jobs with, in front of Hangout? Because just imagine that we have some logical mess in the job, and it will be, still in the loop forever. So do we have some out-of-the-box mechanism that will prevent of such kind of ugly features? Or
Not really. I mean, that would be your job implementation at that point, right?
does it affect other jobs? Or
No, it'll kick off all the other jobs unless you're consuming so much resource and recursion that it kills itself. So that basically W3P will kill itself at some point, right? If you're talking about recursion so much.
Okay, so if I have one specific type of the job, and if the error is inside on the logic, it will fail only this particular job.
Yeah, it won't affect.
Occurrence.
Yeah, it won't affect the other jobs unless you do something really bad and kill the whole thing. We've had jobs running for 3-4 hours at a time. So most of these syndication jobs run a good 3 to 4 hours. They run concurrently at different times. So there are multiple jobs running at the same time. One more question, one more post.
Yeah, I have a question for you. It's me.
Who? Oh.
Yeah. So I noticed that you were saving the last execution of the job in UTC time.
Okay.
But the SiteCron definition of the schedule is in your local server time.
Yes.
So what happens if you have like multiple CM servers across the world? You want the job to be executed on each of them?
Why do you have to be like this? Why can't you be my friend?
I
so
want to be your friend, and I want you to save the SiteCron execution
Is
the
UTC.
schedule and the UTC as
Yeah, no,
everything else in Sitecore.
That makes absolute sense. So part of the reason, so I've been presenting on SiteCron along with our wonderful Sitecore Commerce as well. But part of the reason is to get input like this. So there's a couple of people who've given inputs on disabling the job and things like that after execution, but that's a valid point. That's absolutely true. Like I mentioned, most of the stuff which gets added to SiteCron gets added because of other companies or guys who are using it are asking for it. That's a valid question. If the CMs are in different regions, how do you control it? Yeah, you can. At this moment, you can. But yeah, that should all be UTC based. It's just that I have to find something in there where it makes it. So people are already complaining about this, the cron expression itself. So it's going to kind of get tricky if we add UTC to it, but that is a point to make sure everything stays consistent. So I can look into that. I just wish, see, my problem is that, maybe Adam can work on it at some point, but my problem is Speak itself is such a pain in the ass that even if I want to modify the UI to make it easier, it just is difficult. I just don't want to go through the pain of it. But we were asked to make it easier to generate the cron expression. So if I do end up working on an editor for that, I think making it UTC based would make a big difference. Yeah.
We do it for regular tasks. You can
Are you volunteering your time, young man?
like right after I report this
Suck on site to SXA, yeah. So yeah, I mean, if there's some, I could probably talk to Mike West and see if I can port something in there from that. It'll make a big difference, but yeah, you're not getting a poster though.
No, it was intelligent question.
We have time for the last question. Anyone?
You mentioned you've used it to publish articles at specific time.
Mm-hmm.
Does it support somehow publishing restrictions in Sitecore, or do you have to create an item for it?
All right, so you're my kind of guy. So keep it there. Hold on. So I need help from people like you. Okay, so what I did do is the biggest problem for Sitecore is being able to publish based on publishing restrictions, right? And my problem, and I won't be able to find this now that I'm looking for it, is maybe. Oh, damn. All right, so it's in the code base somewhere. I just have to figure out where it is. Oh, jeez. But it's in there. So, yes, there is a ton of code which I wrote. If you enable it, it says experimental in there, and the code is on GitHub. It looks for publish restrictions. Each time you change a publish restriction on an item, it auto-schedules a job for you. I tested it on my local with different scenarios, removing publishing restrictions, adding item-based publishing restrictions, target-based publish restrictions. It actually does it pretty well. You're more than welcome to enable that. It's part of the SiteCron by default, but I just don't, I think it's in the config too somewhere, I forget. It should say highly experimental somewhere, but yes, there is something in there, right there. So if you put the namespace of the saved handler in that to the namespace in the SiteCron code, it will do that for you. But test it out. If you find any problems with it, either do a pull request or let me know and I'll fix it. But that was the intent, is to solve that problem. And there is code already for it. That was a good question. All right, anyone else has any questions, or we can go to the next one, next presentation.